once again, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today and spending a little bit of time with us discussing a bunch of topics, actually. Being Latino, being a founder, being in tech. I'm excited to talk about Bitcoin, blockchain, TFLabs. So before we get started and dive into that, man, you want to give a little introduction to who you are and what you do, man?
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks for having me. My name is Jonathan G. Blanco. I'm the founder of TFLabs. We are a startup studio where we build some of our own internal products. And then we also do consulting where we work with brands large and small, anything from software development to product management, as well as different growth strategies. I've been in technology for close to 10 years and been an entrepreneur pretty much most of my life. And I'm sure we'll get into some of those topics as we move along.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to really discuss your entrepreneur journey, how you started off, if there was any background of that. Agustin, you wanna jump in?
Yeah,
Get
love
this
it.
going.
Love it. So grateful Jonathan took the time. A little bit before Jonathan was telling me his story, and I resonated with it so much. Like on a personal level, he
Okay.
kind of went in my mind and exposed some thoughts that I've 100% been through. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be able to resonate with his story. So yeah, I think that's a good transition for Jonathan to just start his story and how he started.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So, I love talking about this. I know, you guys are both Latinos. I'm a Latino as well. And I don't necessarily normally tell like this part of my story, but basically, I'm the only person in my entire family that has been born in the United States. All my family's from Venezuela. My folks came here and they spent some time in university, and then I was born here. But because of that, I've always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, but also just frankly been very thankful for winning the lottery of being born in the United States, right? Like for us, most of us as Latinos, let's know how different our lives might be, either if we hadn't come here, or our parents hadn't come here, or whatever, right? So my life would just be frankly different. So just from a kid, I've always wanted to do something bigger, better, just my whole life. And so I've always been entrepreneurial. I was the kid that would go to your house and say like, hey, can I mow your lawn, type of thing. And, I was just talking with Agustin about this before we started recording, is that, and I think it's really important from a Latino founder type standpoint, is that, I always wanted to do something big, but I just didn't really understand what that meant or what that was. And so, being young, both my parents were blue collar. My dad still is blue collar. And, what I thought was big was I'd maybe open a restaurant or a couple restaurants, or I'd have like a physical store where I would sell goods. Or maybe I'd be lucky enough to invent a physical product, and like that's how I would make it, right? And so that was my path. I didn't have any people I looked up to that were in technology or business. The people I looked up to were hip hop artists and sports players. And it wasn't that I wanted to necessarily be either of those, but I guess when I was a kid I wanted to play in the NBA, and I did, I thought I could rap. I probably, couldn't.
We've all been there.
I didn't necessarily want to be those things. But more what it was is I just really appreciated the entrepreneurial hustle, right? And even still, we can talk about this part of it a little bit later, but I actually do a thing where I'll talk about hip hop business lessons, like how can you learn from, like a hip hop artist and how they started, and then how can you apply that to what you're doing to grow your business.
That sounds really cool,
anyways, man. Yeah, well, they'll remind me to talk about that, because I
Yeah.
got a couple of cool stories on kind of how I do that. And the reason I do that is because I like to make, entrepreneurship and product and startups accessible. And it's like, that's a thing that a lot of people I think can relate to, who
Very
are at least
true.
fans of
Very
that,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So anyways, to kind of move along with the story is, I spent some time working in the mortgage industry, and I was like, you know what, let me partner with some folks. And we created a vitamin and supplement store. And, my goal there was like, hey, let's create many of these stores. And, I started to realize then at that point, I was like, man, I can't clone myself. And when I'm physically present in this store, we do really well. And when we have employees, like, there's for one reason or another, something happens or something comes up, right? And so I was like, what is something that I can do? And so I started paying attention to like tech, and I was like, okay, I actually didn't really even care about, the latest technology or any of that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, all the people that have scaled really big have done so like in this technology thing. So then I started messing with e-commerce for the store and like figuring that out and learning there. And then I was like, I just don't want to deal with inventory, and I don't want to deal with like lots of interactions on a person to person standpoint. Like, how do you automate these things?
Correct.
So that's where I really started to get into technology. And I was like, okay, wait a second. Like, we can create, applications that make e-commerce more efficient, or, hey, we can, figure out things, how advertising work to support people coming to your store. And that's really where it kind of got down to the races for me. And then I just, got into the tech side of things. And I've been doing that for, probably the last close to 10 years or so.
That's amazing. That's interesting.
That's
real
cool.
quickly, with
Yeah,
with
man.
you going from the entrepreneur spirit and being in mindset, not really having that exposure to think grandiose and know what areas to take. Been there 100%. And also the second part of the story of how you went into e-commerce, we follow that route as well. We went into e-commerce, and then that's where
Oh,
I
nice.
also got exposed to the power of scaling with technology, ads, everything you touched up on. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Totally. And
Right.
like the different, like Shopify and
Yeah.
Wix and the different tools that are out there have definitely made it, much easier to build and scale. And like, there's no reason why anybody listening or watching here couldn't create their own Shopify store.
Exactly.
And, what I always like to encourage people about is that it doesn't matter how much you sell or if you sell anything at all. What matters is that you learn how to use the tool and that you learn how to use the things. So that way, when you have your brilliant idea, you don't have to be gummed up by, learning how to use something. The best time to learn how to use all these tools is when you don't have an idea, right? Because then you're going to be able to, just spend your time in it, not feel the stress of trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
You're just really just focusing on learning the tool.
I think I actually want to make sure people know that I really like that you mentioned that, because I think that's something that holds a lot of people back in terms of actually diving into something, right? And me and Tin, and I'm sure you, Jonathan, like to read, right? Whether it's articles or books. And I think that's the wonderful thing about books too, because what you just said about Shopify or learning the skill is, even if you don't sell anything, at least you know what's going on, right? And just like books is like, sometimes you read something and it doesn't really resonate at that moment yet, but you could apply it sometime later. That way you're not as like,
100%.
you're not as confused as you were maybe a few years prior. And I think I've never heard it that way. So I really want to highlight that part.
I mean, to expand on that too, I kind of have a way that I try my best to think like this all the time. Sure, we all falter, but I always try to say, like, nothing's easy and nothing's hard, right? It just is. And so, like, the very first time you do anything, of course, it feels more difficult, but then the more you do it, it becomes easier. And, like, I remember seeing a video of Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant. And he was talking about how someone was asking him if he gets nervous for games or something like that. And he's like, why would I be nervous? He's like, like, basically, like, the reason I'm not nervous is because I practice so much. I've been in this situation mentally, this many times. And so it's just an action of following through on what you've done. And if we all think about that for ourselves, it's like, okay, like, usually, at least if I reflect on myself, the times I'm the most nervous is when I'm not prepared. But if I'm prepared, I'm not nervous, right? Because it's like, hey, like, I've practiced this, I've done this or whatever. But if I like forgot about something and I'm going into a meeting and I don't know what to say, like, that's when I feel nervous. And it's because I don't want to look dumb or silly. But the only reason I would look dumb or silly is because I hadn't prepared myself, to execute at that level at that moment in time.
Yeah. I know, Agustin, like, in this instance, right, coming from non-technical backgrounds and being thrown in and deciding to throw ourselves into the tech industry and build something, right? I think, I speak to Tin about this all the time. It's so crazy how far we've come so far on the skill side, right? We still have a lot of work that needs to be done, but the fact is, like, we could have never started because of that. And
Right.
I know Agustin, like, I tell him, like, he's been really, like, involved in a lot of different areas throughout our journey. I'm more on, like, the design side. Obviously, I have no, I want to say I have no experience on the design side. I only have my digital media side experience, but nothing like UX or UI. I had to dive in there. But
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful part too, man. And I know, like you said, you went from owning a vitamin shop to actually getting exposed to the tech side with the e-commerce, and now you're here. You built TFLabs. I mean, you're involved in Bitcoin, blockchain technology, things like that. So I think that's incredible, and I think that's a good
Yeah.
message for people
I mean,
to.
things just the important things is to always like build on top of your previous skill, right?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
um, and what I find for me personally is like usually like the stresses in my life are self-inflicted,
Hmm.
and I'm okay in that stress though, because like I'm setting that for, as an entrepreneur, like you're setting what your own expectation is of yourself to get to that next level.
Yeah.
And so for me, like that's just the way I've always thought about it, is like, okay, I need to learn how to do this. Great, let me figure this out. And so same as you, Luis, is I taught myself how to design. And basically, I just realized, I was like, hey, I have these ideas and I sketch them on a piece of paper. And then I got to try to like find and convince someone to help me do it, because, and maybe pay them, or maybe like say, like, let's trade services or something. Or I could just learn how to do it myself. So what I did is I went to Udemy, and like they had a $10 course because they had something on sale.
Yeah.
And then I did it, and I learned how to do it. And it's funny because then I've had people even recently say like, hey, can you teach me how to do Sketch? And I'm like, no, but what you can do is you can go to Udemy, you can buy this $10 course, and you can pay $100 for Sketch, and you can go through this whole thing, and I will help you if you have like questions on how to use that.
Yeah.
And it's funny how many people don't want to take that little step, right? Like
Interesting.
that right there. I had someone responded as like, hey, like I'm hoping like my employer will pay for that. If you're not willing to pay $115 to learn a new skill, like you come on, like is that a skill that you really want to learn? And I know we can say things like, well, hey, like some people can't afford $115, and I totally get that, and I totally realize that. But I would say that the majority of the people that probably want to learn that skill could figure out a way to get $115, right? Like you
Definitely.
can be like Gary Vee. We probably have all heard Gary Vee.
Yeah.
Go find something and get it for free and then sell it. I actually
Flip it.
do that every weekend. I
I
kind of
love
do it
it,
more
man.
as a hobby, but like every once in a while I do pretty well with it, to be honest.
Nice.
And so like the other day I found this dresser in my neighborhood. I looked online on Craigslist, and it's like this dresser from 1958
Wow.
that it actually, and I got it for free. And I looked it up online, and people sell these things for $1,300, right? So like, I haven't sold it yet because we might just keep the piece because it's a beautiful piece of furniture.
Yeah.
But if I do sell it, I'm going to sell it for like at least $300. That's super rare, of course. Like normally, like I find some things are really cheap, but it's funny because I say if you find a dresser on the street, that's like finding $100 bill.
Yeah.
And so any dresser that you find, you can put it on OfferUp or Let Go or Craigslist, and you can almost always sell it for $50 to $100. So
Yeah.
it's like, what are you willing to do to make it happen?
Yeah. I have a question regarding this side of scope. So you, especially as you start growing your business, you're gaining more and more responsibilities. How do you find the judgment calls to decide what areas to gain the competency and the skills, rather finding those areas that you really have to delegate in the terms of opportunity cost?
I love that question, man.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what's hard, I think, is we see people like Mark Zuckerberg, or basically any person that gets glorified for their abilities in tech usually have a level of skill set that the average person doesn't have, right? Like, I've heard many people say they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. I'm like, no, you're not. And that's okay. Like it's okay that you're not going to be the next Mark or Zuckerberg, because he's a one in like several 100 million, if not more, type of individual, right? I mean, he's a robot. Like, he might actually be a robot, but like, but doesn't mean you can't be the best Augustine or the best Luis and like find whatever like it is that you're doing, right? And so, I guess kind of the way to answer your question, Augustine, is like, I've never really had like the affordability or the flexibility to delegate, in the sense that like I've had to learn how to do a lot of things on my own. And then yes, ideally, like you scale it up to a moment where you're like, okay, it's worth more. My time is worth more to pay someone to do this. And then me figure out a way to make money to pay that individual than for me to keep doing this thing. Right. And I think that's how people have to think overall. And, I use this example a lot when it comes to non-technical founders. You probably have both heard this many times, as people will say like, hey, if I only had a technical founder, I would build this product. Or if I knew how to code, I could do this sort of thing. And it's a total cop out, because first off is that there's a lot of things that you can hack together with Wix or any of these no code type options. You can do things manually at first to like kind of prove it out as well. There's tons of documentation that should probably happen before you even consider writing a line of code, because it costs money to write code. It either costs money or it costs time. And so if you're going to convince someone to be a co-founder or to do it for stock or equity and, do it for free, etc., like you need to not waste their time and come at them with a very significant detailed plan that you've thought through everything.
Exactly.
You just, if Augustine's a developer and I'm like, hey, can you like develop this idea I have? And I just think we can go back and forth. Two things will happen. He's going to tell me I'm crazy, or he's going to say like, sure. And he's going to create something. It's going to be totally different than what I thought it was, because I didn't give him any requirements to do so.
Exactly.
So, I've said this many times, and sometimes people get upset with me for saying it, is that, if you're not willing to pay someone to build your product, then you shouldn't ask someone to build your product for free. Because that basically means that you're not, yes, there is sweat equity that you've done to get to that point, but like it has to hurt a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Like that's what that's what a co-founder and a co-founder or what I like to say when it comes to a co-founder or founder is like, sure, like you created the idea or you're part of there at the beginning, but also what it means is that you've taken on a level of risk and you've sacrificed. For me, if like you haven't taken a level of risk or sacrifice and you're part of a founding team, you're not a co-founder, right? Like you got to take advantage or be a part of an interesting opportunity and you worked hard or whatever, but like risk and sacrifice is really like that extra that is what makes someone a co-founder.
Exactly. And I think you really nailed it right there. So how you're saying that if certain people aren't willing to commit to certain areas, well, that's what really makes a founder is going through the chaos, knowing that there's midst of endless variables. But if you believe so much in the mission that or the problem that you're trying to solve, that's the mentality that you're going to need to persevere, because it's a never ending job. So
totally,
a founder is going to have to live and breathe the mission. And if they're already setting prerequisites and excuses, then it just might not be the
like
path.
you need to be willing to go down with the ship, right? Like if you're not willing to go down with the ship, like, sorry, you're not a co-founder. If it's like, hey, like, you're talking, and this is a lesson for anybody that's listening. It's like, hey, if you have someone that you're working with, they're like, oh, this is great, but like, it's not de-risked enough yet for me to come in. No problem. Like, come in later, but I don't know that you can necessarily be a co-founder, right? And that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Like, I just want to clarify that too, is that you don't have to be a co-founder to have impact in a business. And we all have different levels of risk that we can tolerate. So like, if it means that something has to be de-risked enough, and then maybe you want to be a first employee so that way you can have at least a salary, all means, like there are people that are needed in that role. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right?
100%.
So sometimes I think being a co-founder or founder gets over glorified, and it's not that I want to discourage anybody from doing that, but it does take a level of risk and sacrifice, and that some people just don't want to deal with. And I mean, like one thing actually I want to share here is and maybe you two have experienced similar things as, being Latinos, is that one thing I like to say is that for most people, regardless of where you come from, there most likely has been a time in your life where you experience a very high level of adversity, where like things were just really stressful, bad, whatever happened. Chances are you will never experience something in your startup to that degree, right? Like, and so like if you have been able to make it through the adversity in your life, and you're essentially better because of that adversity, regardless if other people might think it's a bad thing, but you have, grown as a person, you become better, etc. Like for me, like that's an optimal founder, because when you have something happen in your startup, you're not going to run away. You're going to have that feeling, right? Like,
you tweeted this recently. I saw your tweet about this, and I also like the tweet. You said that two games that founders should know is chess and poker.
Oh yeah,
it
totally.
teaches you the risk part and the strategy part. So yeah,
100%.
go on. I just wanted to make sure I saw your.
Oh no, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think chess and poker are two great games. I have a 7-year-old and I'm teaching him how to play poker right now.
Awesome,
cool.
It's funny because people are like, you can't teach him how to gamble, like that's so bad, and it's like, well, one, we're playing with like really small change, and two, I disagree. I totally disagree. I'm not going to tell him like, hey, let's go to Vegas, next year and like, and start spending all his cash. But like what I'm teaching him is how to take calculated risk, and that there's a risk reward profile, and that you might lose. Right. Yeah. And so that's why I think like that. I think poker is an excellent game to teach him at 7 years old. And we'll play it on the computer sometimes, or we'll play it even with just cards and, just with our family. And he enjoys it. And what's funny is that he sees things on the board that I don't see, and he sees it faster. And so again, for me, it's more about like the memory, like the learning. I teach product management at the University of Washington. And the one thing I tell every single product manager or anybody that wants to be it is that the most important thing is learning and understanding and knowing how to think, because the decisions you make in your life have less to do with your knowledge on the subject, and they have more to do with your ability to break down a problem and create a possible solution,
100%.
right? Like I don't need to know I don't need to know anything about most subjects, but if you give me a quick education on it, then I can make a formulated like point of view. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to be right. I'm not saying I'm right, but like I can at least make decisions off of that. So for me, I will always prefer to understand how to think than know the actual subject matter, because then you can make rational decisions.
That's so well put. I believe that if there would be one superpower that I can pass on to my children, or a trait or a virtue, it would be the ability to develop great judgment. And exactly how you're saying, the ability to understand, process information, and make the best optimal decision, and understand all the repercussions. That's priceless. It's one of the most, I think that's what really makes humans at the point we're at. Yeah. Just the ability to have judgment itself.
Definitely. Right. Definitely. I mean, like there's in my last startup, things unfortunately didn't go very well. And, I remember having like this, I don't want to, not to freak anybody out, but I like had like this chest pain, like this, like stress, right? I just felt stress. And I remember I go to my co-founder, I was like, shit, I had this same pain or the same feeling when I was like 6 and 7 years old. And like, I was afraid either that like my family might get deported, or like that the electricity wasn't going to be on when we got home, or I was like embarrassed about going to the food bank. You know what I mean? Like I had that same feeling. So now when I'm experiencing this as an adult in a situation that like I'm not going to die from, and no one's going to be, like harmed, like that's nothing, right? Like I can get through that. So definitely. You might have seen a couple of my tweets recently where I've talked about, I have aspirations to have a venture fund at some point.
Nice.
And so I've been exploring that. I've explored it a couple of years ago and exploring it now through this one vehicle. It's called a rolling fund that Angelus has kind of put together. Yeah. It's pretty interesting. Not to go in super in the details on that, but for me, like when I have that fund one day, what is important to me and what I will value as an investor is probably different than most. So a lot of investors value things like, oh, you went to Harvard and you went to Stanford.
Definitely.
Check. Oh, you've worked at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook.
Bang.
Check. And don't get me wrong. Like I definitely, of course, value that. There's things that you're going to learn. But what I value more is the person who had some crazy upbringing or some crazy scenario that they went through and then figured it out regardless of how bad it was. And now they're hustling and trying to build companies, product, technology, whatever. I would bet on that person way faster and quicker than I would bet on someone that had that Harvard, Amazon pedigree.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not that one's better than the other per se. It's that my value system is based off of like, you're hungry. Okay, then I know that you're going to do whatever you got to do to eat. Right. Like you know, and I want to invest in that overall is kind of like the way I think about it. So that's why I think having Latinos and African Americans and people of color and just proper, women, proper representation in venture capital is so important, is because if someone of that background or of that understanding will likely have those similar type of values. And so, that's really like the important thing. Like, I never want anybody to ever invest in me because I'm Latino. Like that, if anybody ever said like, I'm investing in you because you're a Latino founder, it doesn't feel right to me. But if someone says like, I like that you've had these levels of experiences, in your upbringing or whatever, and it happens to be that you're Latino and so forth, and that's the association, then I'm like, yeah, totally. Like you get like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make it because I've been able to figure out all these other things to get to this point. Like, imagine what I can do once I have like these resources. If this is what I can do with no resources, what can I do when I have resources?
Exactly.
So that's just kind of the way I like to, think through that.
One thing I like to add on there, I've had conversations around this as well, being first generation and having parents that immigrated here, they really instill a mentality that kind of almost like very similar to bootstrapping, right? And there's a way to do your due diligence, persevere with your resources, and that's so applicable, especially in the startup world. So that's a great philosophy to have embedded.
And look, one thing I think a lot of people don't talk about in the Latino culture on being first generation is there's a little bit of being an outcast on both sides. And like, so meaning like, I'm like when growing up, and it's funny, and you guys will probably have heard something similar to this. I'll tell you here in a second, but is that, to like my Latino family or Latino, sometimes even like someone that's like from actual Latin America is like, I'm not Latino enough, but then to like white friends is like, I'm not white. And so it's like funny, right? So like for me, it's I feel privileged in the sense that I feel like I can bounce between two cultures and identify and I can be with some non-Spanish speaking folks, and like people say like, oh, I didn't know you were Latino, I thought you were a tan white guy. And it's like, oh, like a lot, surprisingly you'd be you might feel that you see a lot of people who look like me if you go to Venezuela or South America or Central America is tan white people. And you know what? There's also Black Latinos. Did you know that? And did you know there's even Asian Latinos? Like, what? And so like a lot of people just don't realize those things, right? Interestingly enough, I've never had a Latino person say like, oh, I thought you were a tan white guy. Like it never has that ever happened. Right? But
that's interesting. You note that because it's actually crucial to when you meet someone, right? And I think that's a good distinction because I've experienced that. And even though like I have, it's clear that whether I'm Latino, some people obviously automatically say you're Mexican. I've done the mistake of actually doing that to someone, actually a soccer coach, and he's like, I'm not Mexican, I'm Salvadorian. And it's like, but it's a distinction. And I've gone with friends like, oh man, like you have all the spots of all the food, but I go to, back to Mexico and hang out with family. It's like, oh yeah, you're from California.
Yeah, you're gringo.
Yeah.
Gringo, yeah.
Oh yeah, man.
That's
So
del norte.
Primo gringo.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like that distinction you made, especially with the culture side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely. And like, I think, obviously the world has changed quite a bit, and there's actually a lot of good tech talent in, Central and South America.
Yeah, there is.
I've used tech talent down there before as well. Um,
I wanted to
but
ask you
yeah,
something about that,
sure.
Jonathan, because I know you were talking about the delegation part, and I want to know, like, when you reach that scalability and when you hire or when you delegate, like, what are you looking for? I know you said you weren't looking for the credentials, the resume, like that's awesome, that's good, but you're also looking for character, skill sets. But what's that process look like, or how, based on your experience, like when you reach that point of scalability, like I need to hire, and it's like
Yeah.
I need to hire fast. Like what are you looking for? What's the process?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. We've all been guilty of this in our life at some point, right? Where we don't try very hard at something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of like hope and pray that people don't notice. And then, but what I always say is people do. Like you might think that you're getting away with like being lazy, but like someone somewhere is going to notice. And if for some reason no one does notice, right? So like you're letting yourself down. So for me, like when I look for other people to bring them on board to what I'm doing, ideally, like there's someone that has not an additional value that they're trying to get out of the situation, right? Like they want to, not only are they looking for a job or they're looking for an opportunity, they want to learn more about the subject matter, or they understand it. Like what is the thing that really like how do you measure passion, essentially, is kind of like the best way to put it. So that's really ultimately what I want to look for. And then, do you have the capacity to break down problems and solve them? I always give this story. There's this one time I was hiring someone, and I was asking them all these questions. Every single question I asked them, they got it wrong, every single one. And I hired them anyway. And the reason why I hired them is because um, even though they got the question wrong, the way they formulated like they kind of broke the question down and started telling me how they were thinking through it and what the answer was. I was like, okay, I can't teach that part very well, but I can teach you enough about this subject matter that you should be able to get it quickly. So once you understand this, you're going to be very lethal in how we continue to deliver this. And sure enough, that person was. So
Mhm.
So,
again, I think it just, again, goes back to is like, what are you willing to do to learn subject matter? Very rarely are you able to find someone that is super pro at whatever you're working on. So like, for instance, you guys are working on education, and in an ideal world, you find someone who has all those traits and then also has experience working in ed tech.
mm-hmm.
But if you don't, you have someone that like can translate those experiences and has the ability and the capacity to learn and figure it out, and they're spending time on their own to do it, regardless if it's on the clock or off the clock, because they want to learn about it.
Mhm.
For me, the times, there's probably more times than not where I've spent time, doing things on my own without any expectations. And like, that's when I've learned the most, because I legitimately am trying to do my best to learn it as fast as I can, to essentially, get that mental badge to be able to move on to whatever's
Yeah.
next, or
Mhm.
Yeah.
use that towards something.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
definitely.
amazing.
That's good, because I think there's gonna be a point where we reach that thing where we're gonna have to hire someone quickly, but we also have to find we can't compromise our culture, we can't compromise our values, and we got to make sure we do it properly, right? But sometimes you need to do it fast. I'm not sure if you've read Ben Horowitz, the Hard Things about Hard Things, his book. He
Yeah.
talks about that, and there's an instance in that book where I was talking to Tim, like this guy had an engineer. He gave him a project that was doing a month. He finished it in 2 weeks, and sorry, in 2 days. Like he was coding for 2 days, and Ben's like, dude, how the heck did he do this? But then he didn't show up to work for like a month. Comes out, he finds out that this guy's bipolar and addicted to cocaine, and he literally said, like, it still pains me to think about what could have been, right?
Totally.
So he's like, I hired a genius, but he just didn't, he didn't fit the culture, but he made shit happen, but eventually it didn't work out. But
Yeah, and look, like if someone has like a severe, disorder or
yeah,
drugs, obviously, like that's hard things to work with. But you know, let's say it was just like a couple notches down from that. Like if you can find individuals that like work very well and you know how to harness that power,
Mm.
yeah,
like I'm actually a fan of taking gambles on people like that, right? And so like
yeah,
I remember we hired someone once who everybody did not like this person at all. They were very socially awkward and border, like they were arrogant in like this really like this way that wasn't like really necessary for it. But honestly, it was just that this person just didn't have like the social skills to be like political in a organization.
Mm-hmm.
However, this person was absolutely brilliant and was someone who could, basically create anything you kind of asked them, and they would just do it as long as they had what they needed to do. And so essentially what we just ended up doing is having a filter for them. We had a person that only talked with this person,
Hmm.
and that's how that person operated, right? So it's like, we can try to force this guy into our culture and it's like, you got to be like us, or we can just say like, let's just embrace this person for who he is, and like let's see if we can kind of amend to what he needs. Like, is he going to produce at the value that we need? And sure enough, he did. So I think it goes both ways.
yeah,
And
yeah.
just kind of understanding that. But definitely like that's a very rare circumstance,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a hard executive decision to make because again, you have the culture at hand, right? And you want to make sure that they like. I think it's hard because we want to find people that fit in, but then we also want people to be themselves. But
Yeah.
if we hire someone who's themselves and we like them because what they do, but there's a couple things that he could work on, it gets tricky. But that's a good point that
Well,
you
yeah,
brought up.
and I think it goes back to what we were talking about with like the VC thing,
Hmm.
and that especially at the beginning, look, I mean, we've all experienced this, you know, it's hard to change someone's emotional intelligence. It's hard to change
Mm.
like someone's values. It's hard to change the way someone operates and thinks. You know, if any of you are married, like you all know, like you're not going to change your spouse, and your spouse is likely not going to change you. Like you end up, getting married because you love each other for like the good and the bad. And I like, I had that, I had this epiphany, I want actually honestly fairly recently within the last year or so. And I was like, I could try to have everybody like me, or I could just be my most authentic self, realize that perhaps most people won't like me, or there'll
Mm-hmm.
be a large percentage of people that don't like me. But those that do like me will probably love me, right? Like they will appreciate me for who I am. And at the end of the day, that's all I care about. Like I want to attract the people that allow me to be myself all the time. And if someone doesn't like how I am, it's no big deal. Like we don't have to be enemies. We don't have to have problems. It's just like, we just don't have to be around each other.
Hmm.
Right. And so for my goal is, I would never want to be different and then get an investor, like different than I actually am, and then get an investor to come in, for example, and then have to like be that person for that
Yeah.
investor every time, and then like go back to something
Yeah.
else or whatever that situation is. Right.
That's so
So
true.
yeah, I just think it's really important to always be your authentic self. And you just have to know that there's going to be people that don't like that. And those are the people you don't want to work with. But there's going to be people that really do like that. And, those are the people that you're probably going to be able to, go to battle with and do some pretty interesting things.
Yeah,
Love that.
yeah, yeah, man. That's great stuff, man.
Yeah, like I think of someone like Kanye West, right? So Kanye West is super polarizing, and let's just take the political element out of this for a second. And so, I think it's okay to like someone for certain things, but not agree with them on everything, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
like no one said, unconditional love is something that we hear about in the Bible, and God has unconditional love, and like supposedly when you marry someone you have unconditional love. But we find out it becomes conditional when people get divorced, right? Because if it was unconditional, they wouldn't get divorced.
Exactly.
So there, like this notion of being like unconditional towards a person, regardless, I don't think that needs to happen. So for me, like, I'm a big fan of Kanye West as an artist. I love his music. I've always loved his music ever since it came out. And I feel like his music, and it's probably because at different points of my life, where I remember like things were just like interesting, I remember listening to his album. So it's like his albums that have come out like kind of just follow the trajectory. So that's why, like, I really think he's a very amazing business person, right? Like with what he's done with his Yeezy line and with now his relationship with Gap and his clothes and that sort of thing. And honestly, I like the way he thinks. I don't agree with the way he thinks on everything, but I like the way he thinks. I like the way he breaks things down and the way he deconstructs things. But again, I don't have to agree with him to appreciate him as an individual. And I think that's, for me, is like something that I've learned over the last few years, that where that becomes important, right? And so, like, you know, sure, like I disagree with him, you know, running for office right now, just because I think the stakes are really high and so forth. And you know, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, whether you're on one side or the other, it's like it's going to be a polarizing thing. And so, without getting into that politics stuff, again, all I wanted to stress is that you know, like, the kind of, it's funny because like the people I admire, going back to what I said at the beginning of the conversation, is like, you know, Kanye West is one of the people I admire, again, for like that hustle and how he's able to do things. Other person I admire is Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like, right, who admires Arnold Schwarzenegger? But I can't think of too many people that have been able to envision something and make it happen better than Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I don't know if you guys know the story behind him, but basically when he was in Austria, he picks up a magazine, sees bodybuilders. He's like, I want to do that. He was supposed to be like a policeman in Austria, where he's from. And so he starts bodybuilding and so forth, and, you know, moves to California and you know, becomes a bodybuilder. And then he's like, well, you know, like that acting stuff, I want to do that. And then so he starts acting, right? He's like, he sees these people and he starts becoming an actor. He's like, that real estate stuff, I want to do that. And then and then he's like, that government stuff, I want to do that. And so to me, it's like, you know, how can you ever fault? Sure, he had some issues in his personal life. Like, I don't, so obviously I'm not going to be say like, hey, like, have broken homes. I'm not, no one's going to support that. Most people aren't, of course. Doesn't mean I can't admire him for the elements of what he does. Right. So exactly. I think unfortunately we're too all or nothing in society right now. And, you know, I think there's ability to like fractionalize. Even Donald Trump, and this might piss off some people, but like, Donald Trump is the best brander and marketer probably of all time. Is he a good president? Probably not. Is he a good human? I'll let everybody else decide on that. But like the way he's able to brand and market himself, sure, he's divisive. Sure, he does all those things. But like, you remember the reason why he says things like Crooked Hillary or Sleepy Joe, those are all branding elements. So what I always like to say is like, you don't have to be a jerk about it, of course, but like, that's a lesson in being scripted. That's a lesson in the importance of being scripted as you talk and you say things to people, to your client base. And so,
I think that's why exactly. I think his Twitter is so powerful because he uses that copyright, and that's why
exactly. And
that's why his biggest platform.
Exactly. Right. So like, you know, honestly, the way that he does certain things, like there are lessons in there that people like an entrepreneur could take. Doesn't mean you have to do it verbatim, and doesn't mean you have to like demean people. I'm totally against demeaning people. I'm totally against doing any of those things. But like, here are some quick lessons on how to, you know, do what Donald Trump does. You know, find some scripted things that you say and repeat them and have that be part of your vernacular every single time you're saying something. So now people know you as saying those things, right? Like, you know, attach your brand or wear something about your brand consistently. So that way, like, people always see you to those things, right? And so like, you can learn from anybody.
Oh, okay. I just want to add, like, it's the exactly you're saying. Learn from anybody, see the good, the angles that you can bring onto your side, and use those elements to, from an entrepreneur standpoint, knowing how to sell and persuade and get that market share, mind share, all those variables in between. Yeah, but well,
100%.
With that being said, Jonathan, well, thank you so much for the golden nuggets. This was a very, very insightful podcast. Definitely learned a lot myself, and I'm very glad we got the opportunity to connect.
Yeah, man. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your time, Jonathan. Like Tim said, I think there's so much more we could talk about, and I think it could
Yeah.
happen again. But
Yeah, definitely.
and yeah, thank you, man. Anything else, Tim? I think this was a good one.
No, just once again, I'm so glad we got able to connect, and hopefully we stay in contact, and then who knows where our relationship ends up going.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for having me. Looks like there might be a little bit of a lag. I apologize for that, but yeah, thanks for having me. You know, and you can follow me on Twitter at JG Product,
Perfect.
and then you can see more what we're doing with my company TFLabs TFLabs.io.
Yeah,
Love it, man.
we'll put all the links in the description, and we'll make sure we get you that publicity in the share.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We'll talk soon. We'll stay in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Jonathan. Take care.